Big 2 hours of big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. And remember, we don't do boring. Let's start with this. This story will raise your blood pressure. The biggest ever strike by nurses looks set to go ahead. The Royal College of Nursing say a large majority of nurses have voted in favour of action in a dispute over pay. If strikes take place, they say it will affect non-urgent but not emergency care. Now, what is non-urgent when it's at home? Is a migraine non-urgent? A slipped disc? Tonsillitis? Gastric flu? A mysterious lump that needs investigation? Let me tell you, there's no such thing as non-urgent if it affects someone's ability to work or live a normal life. And do we really think that nurses downing tools for the first time in 106 years is going to help with that backlog of up to 12 million people currently awaiting treatment? Don't get me wrong, the nurses do deserve a pay rise. They were fantastic during the pandemic. We have the best doctors and nurses anywhere. But unfortunately, no one is getting a pay rise now because we spent 2.5 years destroying the economy. Without the, in my view, disastrously failed policy of lockdowns, a boost for nurses would be small change right now. But the country's broke. I hate to say, I told you so. And that ship has passed. And let's be honest, who doesn't deserve a pay rise? Factory workers, they deserve one. Bar and restaurant staff, security. And what about cleaners, supermarket workers or police officers who haven't seen a raise for years and yet put their lives at risk on a daily basis? What about babysitters, nursery workers, people toiling in care homes? The list goes on. Try looking any of those groups in the eye and telling them they don't deserve a raise. I detested the idea of essential and non-essential workers that was established during the pandemic. All workers are essential in my tribute to the economy. Anyone that worked through the pandemic is a hero to me. Funny word, that hero, isn't it? Used very selectively because it's, of course, the latest fashion to divide people up into groups based on a moral hierarchy. We had the deification of NHS staff, who were amazing, but how many millions of other Brits made their contribution during the pandemic too? Prison guards, refuse workers, farmers, the military. I'm not keen on this fetishization of any particular workforce. And so, as the economy emerges from the greatest trauma since the Second World War, sadly, talk of pay for everyone. The country is on its knees. We are skint with £2 trillion. Whoever you are, when we're borrowing just to pay the bills, means billions more being added to the national debt to be paid for, of course, by future generations, upon whom we have already shat from a great height with school closures and other COVID measures. Our young people have suffered enough. Starting salaries for nurses in England are currently just above £27,000, rising to nearly £55,000 for the most senior nurses. The RCN say the average pay for a full-time established nurse is just above £32,000. Is that enough? You tell me. But their union are seeking a massive rise of, wait for it, 15%. Who's going to pay for that? Anyone responsible for a household's finances will tell you that debt is a noose around your neck. If left unchecked, it is economic quicksand. Once you start sinking, you may not be able to get back up again. Ask Greece. Inflation is now the common enemy, and public sector pay rises will only feed the monster and add to the spiralling national debt, which we may, in time, have trouble servicing. So the proposed nurse strikes are not just economically unviable, but in fact, they're unethical too. Nurses and doctors make a commitment when they enter the profession, which is to preserve human life and to take care of the sick. How can they possibly do that if they're outside of a hospital setting and on a picket line? If the nurses go on strike, people will die, and that would be unforgivable, and Florence Nightingale would be spinning in her grave. For any medical professional to down their stethoscopes, put away their bedpans and hang up their uniforms is morally unconscionable. So my message: do it. For the sake of patients, carry on, nurse. Nurses deserve a pay rise. Countries broke because we had lockdowns. That's my view. There was a different way, we didn't take it. We are where we are. But do you disagree? And especially if you're one of the nurses considering industrial action, drop me a line right now. Have I missed the point? mark@gbnews.uk. I'll get to your emails shortly, but now let's hear the views of my excellent panel who are reacting to all of the big stories of the day. And don't forget, we've got the papers live and uninterrupted at 10:30. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome TV presenter, celebrity chef and best-selling author Tonya Buxton, leading research analyst and writer Dr. Rakib Ehsan, and political consultant and author Emma Burnell. Well, Tonya, let me start with you. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
What do you think about the pay rises? I think that in principle, no one would begrudge nurses a bump, but we've wrecked the economy, so how are we going to pay for it?
For me, the whole thing about the NHS is the NHS is broken. We sink too much money into the NHS as it is, and we could give those nurses money. We could get rid of those diversity officers that we hired, was it, in March last year?
Yeah.
All of them getting 250,000 a year, 10 of them being hired. So the money is in the NHS, but what we really need to do, and what this government could really make a difference doing, is going in there and breaking up and restructuring the NHS so those on the ground get the money. So I don't think they should go on strike, but I do believe the money is there for them. We just need to get rid of all those middlemen and give it to the nurses.
What about extra borrowing to pay the nurses? Because at the moment, that seems to be the only feasible option.
No, I mean, we've done enough borrowing. I mean, you know as we have to find a way out of it. Growth is the only way out. More borrowing is not the way.
Tonya, before I get to your brilliant colleagues tonight, can I ask you about this concern I've got in relation to the deification of healthcare professionals and of the NHS generally, that if you dare to criticise the NHS or question why it is that even though it costs £13,000 a year per household, it's not delivering, do we need to sort of change the terms of discussion around our health service and hold it better to account?
I do, but again, I don't think it's the people on the ground. I admire and respect the people that work on the ground, the nurses, the doctors doing the work. It's this big, fat layer of middle people that do nothing and just suck off the NHS and literally don't give anything back. They're not doing anything. They're, like they said, the diversity officers, the middlemen, the people that are doing deals with the big pharma groups. They all need to go. There needs to be a massive clean-out of the NHS, because I do think the nurses are heroes. I do think doctors are heroes, the ones that are open-minded and are doing the right thing. But there's just too much rubbish, isn't there, in the NHS? There are just too many freeloading people doing jobs that are unnecessary. Rubbish
is a polite word. Rakib Ehsan, most of the public believe that nurses deserve a pay rise. It's my view they deserve a pay rise. The question is how we deliver it and when we deliver it. I would just say to the RCN, the nursing union, read the room. Britain is broke, and it's not the job of future generations to give nurses this pay rise, because that's what it'll be. It's either tax rises, and I can't see how we could be any more taxed, or it's borrowing.
Well, I completely agree with Tonya. I think that there's a great deal of money within the National Health Service. It's a matter of how it's allocated. There is a bloated layer of middle-level managers, especially with the NHS's equality, diversity, inclusion revolution, people who are meant to help foster a more responsive NHS to the needs of our increasingly diverse population. But in reality, Mark, they don't really do that. They don't build those important bonds with harder-to-reach minorities in order to deliver the healthcare that they need. I think that when we're looking at this debate, I agree. I'd love to see our nurses in the NHS paid more money. But I think that there's a very strong argument to be made for people across a variety of professions to be paid better wages. But as you say, the reality of the matter is we have a broken economic model which was significantly damaged as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, or rather the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including lockdowns. So I think that overall, what we need to talk about is how do we create a higher wage economy, but it can't be through borrowing, Mark. It has to be done in a fiscally responsible way.
Yes, and I just wonder whether we are too sentimental when it comes to the NHS and to nurses, because we certainly heard Keir Starmer recently say that these nurses had earned it during the pandemic. But as I mentioned in my Big Opinion monologue, I don't like to categorise groups and have a moral hierarchy of workers. For me, anyone that went out to work during the pandemic is a hero, and they all deserve our applause. And whether it's taxi drivers or police officers or school teachers, arguably, Rakib, they all deserve a raise.
Absolutely. I think that when it comes to the NHS, I'd say that there's a sanctification of the National Health Service, if truth be told. And that means that admittedly sensitive debates surrounding the structure of the NHS, how it should be organised, there's certain people who look to suppress those debates. That over-romanticisation of the National Health Service ultimately doesn't do, especially those who are working in lower level roles, or rather lower paid roles than NHS, it doesn't do them any favours, because actually what I'd be supportive of is a reorganisation of the National Health Service which trims down on the middle level management and allocates funds which ultimately could help to provide better paid roles for those who, in my view, are underpaid within the National Health Service.
Emma Burnell, we've willfully wrecked the economy by shutting the country down on and off for 2.5 years. Economists told us that it would be cost-free. Well, here we are. The nurses deserve a pay rise, but they're not going to be able to justify it in the current economic circumstances.
It's really interesting. I mean, I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs of lockdowns. We've done this dance many, many times. The 15% was actually a figure arrived at by the RCM before lockdown. The 15% was arrived at before inflation went absolutely insane. 15% is actually what the RCN are asking for, because they have had their wages stagnating since 2010 for so long that that is the equivalent of what they've had essentially as a pay cut over the last 15 years. So what they're asking is just for their wages to be brought back into line with what they once earned. And we are seeing a massive recruitment and retention problem at that level in the NHS. And that, we live in a market economy. What they're saying is, we should be paid what we could go out and get somewhere else doing a different job. And too many people are at the moment deciding that they are not willing to go through the difficulty of being a nurse, which is not the easiest job in the world, and be paid for it in such a way that they can't feed their families and have a decent life. We do need to push money down to the people who spend it. People on the lower wages spend more of their income than people who earn more. And that's why we need to make sure that we are listening to people like nurses who are saying this is an investment in the future. Actually having nurses well paid, decently paid nurses, will make sure that we don't have an NHS that cannot staff itself in 5 years' time.
But Emma, how do we do it? Do we have more borrowing to be paid for by future generations? And we know how hard it is for Britain to borrow now, because we're at the behest of Rolex-wearing, bonus-chasing international financiers. Good luck convincing them that public sector pay rises are a good investment. Or do we have higher taxes? Now, Emma, we've got the highest tax burden since the 1940s. If they go any higher, that's going to damage the economy too.
There are difficult choices to be made, definitely. I would not borrow for day-to-day spending. I think we need to borrow for more investment in certain areas like infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think we can do that borrowing reasonably easy. What we have absolutely seen, what has been fundamentally proved in the last 6 weeks, you can't put everything on the Never Never, and that's not what is needed. So there will be difficult choices about how we tax, where the tax burden falls.
Emma, you're Chancellor. I think you'd make a great Chancellor.
God forbid.
Which department do you take the money out of, Emma? Does it go from schools? Does it go from policing? What exactly, that tough choice you speak of?
Well, I think some of it is about raising more income through taxes, and if I'm Chancellor, that will happen. It would happen. I would put the tax burden in different places. I would tax wealth more than income. I think that's a better way of raising taxes. I think we need to make sure that we are allowing more people at the bottom to spend money and fewer people at the top to hoard it, and that is definitely a way to change the way that the tax burden overall doesn't fall on the majority of us. It does actually fall where it's needed. There are, of course, things that you would trim in government, things that you would change in government, things that you change within the NHS. The reason I'm slightly cynical about the idea of an NHS reorganisation is that we had one in 2012 and we've been picking up the pieces and reorganising it back ever since because it was such a disaster. So, yeah, of course, you've got to keep looking at how these things work and how they're managed. But another big shake-up is just the last thing these very, very tired and desperate people need.
And you're so right. They are tired and they are desperate and they have been amazing during the pandemic. Final thought on this, though. And look, it's an imponderable. I don't think, Emma, anyone's got the answer. You've been incredibly eloquent. Millions of people will agree with you, but just drilling down on how we find the money for these pay rises, the issue with raising taxes is not only do wealthy people just up sticks and leave, they're very mobile, but it creates an environment in the UK that's less attractive for investment. In the end, if taxes get too high, you shrink the economy, which makes all of us poorer. And that's the tension that the Treasury now face with their little mini budget too on the 17th of November.
There are definite tensions to be had. And, yeah, there are, I mean, I wouldn't say 90% tax rates, but I think there are ways that we can shift the tax burden so that it's not simply a case of having a lot of high taxes on everybody, but making sure that people are paying what they can afford, that we are having wealth flowing better.
Yeah.
That money is flowing around the economy rather than having these vast areas of inequality where a lot of people don't earn enough to spend a lot in the economy and a few people have a lot of money they're not spending.
Yeah, well, I think that's a fair point. Tonya Buxton, who's with us, she's made a fortune on cookbooks, so I'm sure she won't mind paying a little extra tax next year. She's absolutely loaded. Listen, let me tell you, we've got so much to get through in the next hour and 40 minutes. I think you'll agree we're travelling business class with my panel tonight. Rakib and Tonya and Emma are back very, very shortly in the news agenda. We'll be looking at this black hole that the Chancellor has got to deal with. The latest thing now is an attack on the middle classes, freezing the tax threshold until 2028, which is basically a tax rise for millions. So, are the Tories taxing aspiration? We'll debate that later. My Mark Meets guest is the Brexiteer, former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, and a man who has clashed with Jacinda Ardern, the Kiwi Mussolini, on more than one occasion. Winston Peters is quite a personality, and he's live after 10. But next, in the big question, is the push for net zero undemocratic? Did anyone ask you? I'll see you in 3.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales
And Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll look a big reaction to my big opinion and monologue, Mark at gbnews.uk. Regarding the nursing strike, Rob says, Mark, the idea that nurses are to strike should bring all of us to fear the future should it set a precedent. Any service that provides an essential national continuation, especially frontline public service workers, should remember that it is a backbone of national service, something which once provided great pride in an individual to be part of. Clearly, some of those NHS personnel have forgotten the award of the George Cross and what it stands for. National service has become a concept that is ridiculed. Striking damages the NHS and places increased pressure upon other public services that will no doubt have to fill the breach. Deserving of higher wages, yes. Right to strike, no, says Rob. Well, that's a very balanced view you've shared there, Rob. A couple more before we get to the big question. How about this? Ed Baker, one government worker's pay rise is a tax rise for the rest of us. Simple as that. Louise, Mark, the NHS needs a root and branch reform. A good start will be getting rid of the layers of administration, quangos and diversity departments. Funding should go to frontline medical staff. Good evening, Mark. I went into nursing in 1969, aged 17, says Sue. I've recently retired. I'm now 72. I've seen how nursing has changed. Everything can be done at ward level. Ordering, administration, recruiting, bed planning, everything. Management above Band 8 should be cleared out. 2 or 3 matrons for general oversight are enough. Absolutely nothing more is necessary. This will save billions. Sue for Health Secretary. And a couple more before we go, because your emails are always brilliant. Anne says, Mark, my neighbour is single, works 3 days a week, and although working on a COVID ward, broke COVID rules during the pandemic, earns $35,000, does not need a pay rise. Few people actually consider nurses to be angels or in need of a pay rise. That from Annie. And then 2 more and then we're done. First of all, Shirley. Mark, please get your facts right. The average nurse's pay is not 32 grand, as claimed in your rant at the start of the programme. When the nurses go out on strike, the wards will be covered. The risk to patients will be minimised as much as possible. Us nurses here in Northern Ireland went on strike the winter before COVID closed down the country, and it was all safely planned for. Please get your facts right before spouting your misinformation. Well, Shirley, I appreciate the correction, but I will tell you that that figure of an average of 32k comes from the Royal College of Nursing. But look, thank you for sharing your views on that. That's an official RCN stat. But let's get finally to Andrew, who says, Mark, try stopping foreign aid and stop immigration. Stop funding a war and get rid of the illegal immigrants that are already here. You would think it was rocket science. There you go. I'll get to more of your thoughts shortly, but it's time now for this. Yes, it's time now for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. And today sees the start of the International Environmental Summit COP27 in Egypt. But as world leaders look to gather and agree new climate goals, which could see a change in our way of life, such as what and when we drive, how we heat our homes, how much we fly, and even the food we eat, is the push for net zero undemocratic, given that the public do not have a direct say? Who voted for green taxes and eating bugs? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome former Conservative Government Minister, best-selling author and broadcaster Anne Widdecombe, and ex-Labour MP and another popular author whose book Scandal at Dolphin Square is out now, and I'm told is a cracking piece of history that reads as a thriller. It's Simon Danczuk. Simon, let me start with you if I can. Welcome to the programme. What do you think? Is net zero undemocratic? I don't remember my viewers voting for, I don't know, a net zero existence.
Well, I think it is democratic. We had a general election in 2019. The political parties clearly had a manifesto and an agenda as part of that general election. The Conservative Party stood on a manifesto pledge of zero emissions by 2050, and that's what people voted for. So they know what they've been voting for, and they should be getting what they voted for. And a lot of opinion polls show that the public generally support reducing emissions. So I think there is support for it, and I do think it's democratic.
They support it, Simon, until it hits them in the wallet, when they've got to go and buy a Tesla and get rid of their diesel car, when they've got to have a heat pump boiler rather than the trusty boiler they've had for years.
Well, this is the intervention that government has to make, and I think it's fair to say that previous governments, the one that Anne Widdecombe was in, the Labour government under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, just did not do enough in terms of investing in this area, not enough in terms of nuclear power. We have the least efficient, energy efficient housing stock in Europe, so much more should have been done on that. So it's been a failure of previous governments and the current government to do enough on this issue. And had they been doing more, then the public themselves would be in a better position in terms of the infrastructure for electric cars, in terms of having more energy efficient homes. So there's been a failure in the past, and we can't be moving forward in terms of failure on this issue again.
Yes, and Simon, you're right to call out both Blair and arguably Cameron as well for dropping the ball when it came to nuclear. I couldn't agree with you more, but I don't think that my viewers will take kindly to the international global elite flying off in their private jets to Egypt to negotiate our futures, Simon.
Well, I think they are right to be critical of this sort of approach, and just gathering together and talking about this issue rarely solves anything.
It's a talking shop.
Exactly. We need to see action. And that's what this government needs to do. It needs to start taking action. It needs to start investing. If we're going to spend money, don't just throw money at people's energy bills. Help them by reducing the energy that they need to use. We need to create less demand in the system. And that means investing in green jobs, investing in retrofitting homes, investing in the infrastructure that helps us have a cleaner environmental and energy policy.
Anne Widdecombe, in relation to net zero, I think plenty of voters out there will take the view that they didn't vote for living in a cold house. They didn't vote to have to cycle everywhere, and they didn't vote to be poorer.
Well, this is the whole point. I mean, it's all very well to say the public are broadly supportive of working towards reducing emissions and even possibly working towards eventually net zero. What the public are not in favour of is, first of all, being obliged to buy a particular type of car, which is going to be much more expensive, not particularly easy to run, still in near infancy as far as the technology goes. Try and find a charge point, for example. They didn't vote to have expensive boilers thrust upon them. They didn't vote for the actual mechanics which the government is elected to promote. And I was on a panel not that long ago, which was cheering on my Labour opponent until the moment came when I said that if I've got to buy an electric car after 2030, I should be buying second-hand petrol cars for the rest of my life. And they all began cheering because nobody actually wants to be told that they have to spend more money in a certain way. People want to be in charge of their own decisions. And, in a democratic society, that is exactly what they should be. And the billions that we're putting into, climate change, the absolute billions that we're putting into it, we could be spending on the nurses' pay rise.
Anne Widdecombe, whether it's the dystopian World Economic Forum, who are completely unelected, led by the terrifying Bond villain that is Klaus Schwab, whether it's the talking shop that is COP27, populated by out-of-touch billionaires, this is the elite storyboarding our lives.
No, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. I mean, I objected a few years ago when the government decided you could only have a certain type of light bulb, the state in your light bulbs. Then some councils were actually deciding to put microchips in wheelie bins. I don't think they actually did in the end. That's what they were proposing. The state in your rubbish. The state is in everything. And Tories believe in a small state. Rishi Sunak should be promoting a small state.
Simon, you were a cracking MP, and you are a Democrat through and through. Does it not bother you, the spectacle of the likes of Bill Gates and Tony Blair and Bill Clinton essentially planning what the future's going to look like for us plebs?
Well, I'm not sure that I agree precisely with your analysis. What we have to do is reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And I suspect that one of Anne's problems is that she denies that climate change is occurring. And what we've got to do is then enable and encourage the public to do more around this issue. And it's not nanny statism, as Anne is implying. It's about providing guidance, encouragement, investment in these crucial issues, because what we have to do is reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. That's the basis of it. And in the UK, we must do all we can to do that.
Simon, can't we use some fossil fuels? What about very, very clean, small-engined petrol cars? I wonder whether there's going to be a big headache in the years to come with the mining of all of these rare minerals like lithium and cadmium for those electric cars.
Well, the technology is developing all the time at a very quick pace. I think we have to take advantage of that. In the UK, what we should be doing, because we're very strong in terms of science and technology, we should really be leading the way on these issues, not falling in behind other countries in terms of leadership. We should be leading the way and developing these technologies that can provide an advantage to the country and to its people. Where I do disagree with Labour's policy, and we heard it today from Ed Miliband, this idea of giving money to developing countries like Pakistan, I think is the most stupid policy I have ever heard. And if Labour are going to rely on Ed Miliband to get them elected at the next general election, then I fear they won't be winning it. That's the problem.
You're right there, Simon, and we'll be discussing this crazy idea of reparations for the Industrial Revolution at 10 o'clock in My Take at 10. Simon, you weren't afraid of criticising your own party as a Labour MP. You were spirited and independent. What do you think about Keir Starmer's latest brainchild, which is a state-sponsored energy company investing in unproven and flaky renewables?
I think we have to make much more investment in renewables. There's no doubt about that. Wind farms on land and onshore and offshore.
Simon,
more solar panels.
But the Germans have invested over 200 billion euros in renewables over the last 10 years, and they now face a winter fuel crisis. Yep. A fat lot of good it did them.
Well, we have to invest more in alternative energies. There's no alternative.
Well, Germany did it, Simon. It didn't work.
Well, I'm a big advocate
of
nuclear power. Some of the solution is nuclear power. Right. That's what we need to see. And we should have been doing that many years ago. And I think that's part of the solution.
And on that, I'm totally with you. Definitely nuclear all the way. Anne, please come in. You're positively exploding. I think that the anger that you contain within your body, Anne, fuel a town for a couple of years.
Well, I'd like to think it could. The reason that I was indicating rather vigorously that I wanted to come in is that it's all very well talking, as Simon does, about the UK, should be doing all these things, but it's a disproportionate response. The UK is responsible for about 1% of all these emissions. China and India are belting the stuff into the atmosphere on a daily, hourly basis. And if we really want to influence the climate, if we can, but if we really want to do that, that's where we should be looking, not at our pathetic little 1%, when we could spend the money which is needed in more immediate circumstances.
Look, what a great debate. What a great debate it's been between two political luminaries and two best-selling authors. Anne, you wrote that lovely book, The Clematis Tree, and lots of other wonderful works of fiction. And let me tell you that Simon is a talented scribe as well. His latest book is called Scandal at Dolphin Square. It's out now, and the reviewers are saying it's a cracking piece of history that reads like a thriller. And Simon, I think you're joining us in the studio soon for Mark Meets. I'm looking forward to that. And of course, Anne is with us every Sunday right up until Christmas as our wise political head. And see you in a week's time. Simon, catch you soon. Brilliant stuff. What's your reaction to that debate? Is the push for net zero undemocratic? Lots of emails are coming in, and people have pointed out that the net zero agenda was in the manifesto of both the Tories and Labour, and therefore it is democratic. Well, look, we asked you on Twitter, because we're very democratic, is it undemocratic? Well, 87.4% say yes, it's undemocratic, whilst 12.6% say no. There you go. The people have spoken. My Mark Meets guest is the Brexiteer, former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, and a man who has clashed with Jacinda Ardern on more than one occasion. Someone's got to stand up to the Kiwi Mussolini, the smiling tyrant. Winston Peters is live at 10. Quite a character. You won't want to miss that one. Plus, we got the papers with uninterrupted panel reaction at 10:30. And at the top of the hour, I'll be dealing with Ed Miliband, who wants us to pay reparations for the Industrial Revolution. We shouldn't be paying revelations and whatever. Put your teeth back in, Mark. They should be paying us because we transform the world with the Industrial Revolution. Look, next up in the news agenda with my panel, are the Tories taxing aspiration? I'll see you in 3.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful. Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
What's the best bit of my show? It's when you get in touch. I just love your emails because you always put the record straight. And so let's get straight to it. On climate change, Derek says, Mark, I doubt we can stop climate change as it will carry on until our sun dies and Earth becomes a dead frozen ball spinning in space looking for its own black hole. That's poetic, isn't it? It's also erotic, but let's move on. Family show, it's the Lord's Day. Behave yourselves. Now, Derek goes on, maybe the Almighty will try again without the encumbrance of Adam and Eve. Too much hassle? There you go. What a great email. Derek, thanks for that. Also, we've got Steve. Mark, the future is not electric cars. With all of the future waste that batteries produce and a shortage of minerals, it's hydrogen with no waste products that we should pursue. Yeah, and I agreed with Simon earlier, Simon Danchuk, about nuclear as well. Ed, what about China's coal-fired power stations? Let's not kid ourselves. Our contribution to climate change is like farting against the north wind. You're very poetic tonight, you lot. Lefties says Gareth, love to say investment and invest, but they never say malinvestment, which is the sum total of where we are now. Mark, when I voted Conservative, says Philip, I didn't approve of everything in the manifesto. Net zero, for example. Anne Widdecombe is spot on with her comments. She reflects my opinions. As for your Labour guy, why the hell should we be leading the way and setting an example? Never understood that argument. Philip, in the beautiful town of Bournemouth. And last but not least, on nurses, Isabella is putting me straight, which is what I love. Isabella says nurses are having their job descriptions changed, doing work that is at least a grade above them. Also, teachers that are in the job the same amount of time as a staff nurse get 10,000 more than nurses. So she's saying teachers get more in relative terms. Police also have higher starting wages and do not need to go to college beforehand. They are, in most cases, doing work of 2 or more nurses. They are so short-staffed. Doctors are putting more of their patients onto the nurses in GP surgeries. Nurses have families to keep too. MPs get rises of 11%. For what? There you go. Isabella putting the record straight and bigging up the nurses. Thanks for that, Isabella. Keep those emails coming, mark@gbnews.uk. Reacting to the big stories of the day, my all-star panel, TV presenter, celebrity chef and best-selling author Tonya Buxton, leading research analyst and writer Dr. Rakib Ehsan, and political consultant and journalist Emma Burnell. Now, the Times report that millions of middle earners will be more than $3,500 poorer because of plans by Rishi Sunak for a stealth raid on income tax that will last, wait for it, at least 6 years. The PM and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, are thought to have agreed to extend until 2028 a freeze on income tax thresholds that has been due to end 2 years earlier. The agreement came at a meeting on Monday to discuss how to plug the £35 billion gap in public finances. The Times point out that tax thresholds at a time of high inflation drag millions more workers into paying more tax every year because a greater share of their wages are pushed into the higher brackets, a stealth tax known as fiscal drag. In other words, we are all sleepwalking into a tax nightmare. So it begs the question, are the Tories killing aspiration? Emma, the answer is yes.
Yes, I mean, the answer is yes, but I wouldn't necessarily say the answer is yes because of a particular measure on income tax. I think the Tories have been killing aspiration in a number of different ways for a really long time. They've been in charge for 12 years, and we have an economy that works for almost nobody. We have an almost complete inability for a generation up to the age of about 40 now to get onto the property ladder. We
started under Blair?
Absolutely. I'm not going to make any excuses. We should have absolutely, the Labour government should have built a lot more houses. I have said this to them repeatedly. I said it then, I'll say it now. I'm not going to come on here and be a pure cheerleader or apologist for Labour either. We got a lot of things wrong. I'd like to see us get some things right in the future. That's my role, is to be that agitator for the Labour Party and to tell them when I think they're getting things wrong. I think it's really, really important that when we talk about aspiration, we think about the kind of country we want to be, not just the kind of people, what we personally aspire to. I have my own dreams. What I would like to see is a world in which... Sorry?
Maserati.
Oh, God, no. I've got a 4KA and I'm really happy with it.
Hot tub, Rolex.
Such a Dolan
bit
thing.
of bling.
Yeah.
Sorry, just for
I mean, I've sold out my most recent place. My biggest aspiration now is a bigger theatre, darling.
Yeah, no, you're a great writer and performer as well, yeah.
But to be honest, what I'd like to see is the kids in my neighbourhoods have the ability to do what they dream of doing. And for a lot of that, those are very simple dreams. They want a good job that they can rely on, that will give them a decent standard of living. They want to be able to live in a house with some security. That might be in terms of building much more social housing, but also making sure more people can get on the property ladder. It means investing and putting government backing to the kinds of industries that will have a 100-year future, not a 5-year future.
Don't say investing. Gareth doesn't like that. Lefties love to say investment.
I am a lefty, Gareth, and I'm going to talk about investing. So, you know, I'm here to annoy you personally, Gareth. That's my job.
Yeah, you've been choosing your own words for a few years now. Tonya, what do you think about this? Are the Tories taxing aspiration?
Yes, they are. But
do they have any choice?
Yes, they do. They could really do something phenomenal, do something maverick and just change everything. You know, I really believe that...
Did they try that, by the way, about 4 weeks ago in the budget?
They did, actually, but what can we say? But my thing is that we know that, you know, if you tax the rich, the super rich, the very rich, all they do is get really, really clever lawyers that mean that they don't pay the taxes anyway. So I would like to see a society where we're all on the same tax. Everyone pays, I don't know, 20% tax.
That's a great
across
idea.
the board.
Flat rate.
And then a flat rate across the board, and those that make more money will pay more, and those that don't make as money will pay less. And also, for me, it's all about small businesses. You know, I'm an immigrant's child. You know, if it wasn't for small business, we just wouldn't be here. You know, whether it be corner shops or dress factories or hairdressers or all the kind of bakers and all the things that kind of my people came over and did. Taxing them to death just stops them from wanting to do that. And that's what stops our economy from growing. And that stops us having the money to build houses and do everything that you said.
And, Tonya, it's a double nightmare, which is just a world in which corporations and the state dominate our lives.
Exactly. Well, that's where we're at now. That's where we're at now.
Accelerated by the pandemic. Briefly, Rakib, what do you think? The Tories' taxing aspiration? You're very aspirational.
Well, I mean, I think
you're always thinking big, aren't you?
Well, I'd like to think so. But I think I agree with some of the points that have been raised in terms of... I think one of the most aspirational things about our democracy was the aspiration to own your own home. And the reality of the matter is, I mean, don't blame one particular political party. We simply haven't taken house building seriously in this country. And you're looking at these plummeting rates when it comes to fertility. The reality of the matter is that has a bad impact in terms of marriage and having children as well, if you don't provide, if there's not a decent supply of family-friendly housing. And you think that a Conservative party, a party supposedly of home ownership, but also family, you know, that sense of that sort of multi-generational cohesion, it's not there. No, housing's at the heart of that.
Exactly right. I think Rakib's put his finger on the button there, which is build, baby, build. Build some bloody houses. How hard can it be? As an earlier emailer said, it's not rocket science. Lots more to get through. You're going to love this story for my take at 10 at the top of the next hour. Ed Miliband, Labour frontbencher, of course, he wants to have reparations. Britain will pay reparations to 4 countries for the Industrial Revolution. They've lost the plot. I'll be dealing with Ed Miliband straight after this. See you in 3 minutes.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's exactly 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan Tonight. My Mark Meets guest is the Brexiteer Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand and a man who has clashed with Jacinda Ardern on more than one occasion. Well, someone has got to stand up to the Kiwi Mussolini, the smiling tyrant that she is. Winston Peters is live just after 10 o'clock. What a character. Can't wait to speak to him on the show. Plus, we've got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 and our quiz of the week, which I want you to play at home. After this, my take at 10. Should Britain pay reparations for the Industrial Revolution? That's the latest idea from Labour. Do they even want to be in power? I'll be dealing with Ed Miliband shortly. But first, the headlines with a good friend of mine who is politically down the middle, Ray Addison.
Thank you, Mark. Here's the Down the Middle news from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has arrived in Egypt for the COP27 Climate Change Summit. A warning for those watching, there's some flashing images coming up. Rishi Sunak, who U-turned after originally saying he wouldn't attend, will pledge to make the UK a clean energy superpower. He'll urge all countries to move away from fossil fuels when he addresses the conference tomorrow. Mr. Sunak will also argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlights the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. Well, meanwhile, Boris Johnson will call for an end to defeatism at COP27 amid a worsening economic situation. In his speech at the summit, the former Prime Minister will warn that a corrosive cynicism about net zero is ruining efforts to wean the world off fossil fuels. Mr. Johnson will insist it's still possible to achieve the goal of making sure temperatures don't go above 1.5 degrees, avoiding the worst effects of climate change. Hundreds of people have been protesting outside the Manston Immigration Centre, demanding it be shut down. Action Against Detention and Deportation campaigners are also calling for Home Secretary Suella Braverman to resign. The site has been at the centre of a crisis this week after it emerged it was over capacity, with some asylum seekers describing conditions as being like a prison. Downing Street says the numbers have now fallen to 2,600. Well, the government has announced that a pilot scheme to reduce the backlog in asylum claims will be rolled out nationwide by next year. The Home Office says an 8-week test run reduced the time that asylum seekers waited for a first interview by around 40%. Almost 100,000 migrants are currently waiting for a decision on their asylum claim. The government says it has contingency plans in place if nurses go on strike amid a growing threat of industrial action in the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing is expected to announce this week that its members have, for the very first time, voted in favour of national strike action in their dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members have been balloted, the biggest ever in the union's history. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News, the People's Channel. Back now to Mark.
My thanks to Ray Addison, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. Very excited about my Mark Meets guest, who is the former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, and a man who has clashed with Jacinda Ardern on more than one occasion. Winston Peters is live in the next few minutes. Plus tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction, and our quiz of the week. We'll be testing you at home and my panel in the studio for your knowledge and theirs of the week's big stories. Lots to get through, but first, my take at 10. Election. Following the disaster that was Jeremy Corbyn, who posed a clear and present danger to not just our economy, but our national security, they elected this man as his replacement. A pious, virtue-signalling North London lawyer and someone who can't even define a woman, even though he's married to one. Astonishing that after just 4 days in office, our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was actually ahead of Starmer in the polls in terms of who the public be a better Prime Minister. With centre-ground aspirational policies, as promoted by Tony Blair in 1997, Labour would be a shoo-in for power in a couple of years' time. Take a look at Tony Blair back in the 90s, speaking on the BBC, extolling the idea of low taxes even for the wealthy.
Because I think it's important that people have an incentive to work hard and to do well. And because I don't think that the answer, for example, to the problems of youth unemployment is to take some money off those at the top and give a few more pounds in benefit to those at the bottom.
Those were the days. I wonder why he won 3 landslide election victories. But things have changed since Blair and New Labour. This current Labour Party is just out of touch with the British public. We know how they tried to overturn Brexit and have sneered at anyone patriotic in the past. But just this week, in relation to the illegal migrant crossings, many of their front benchers seem more concerned with the welfare of those entering the country illegally rather than, for example, homeless veterans who line the streets of our great cities in cardboard boxes. And ex-Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott effectively tried to blame the appalling rape of a child in a refugee hotel on Suella Braverman, rather than the monster who actually did it. She said the crime was terrible, but that's what happens when you demonise migrants. Eh? So, what's the latest tone-deaf act of political suicide from Labour? Enter stage left another disastrous ex-Labour leader, Ed Miliband, the man who needlessly changed the rules in terms of the leadership election for the Labour Party, which allowed Jeremy Corbyn to happen. I always wanted his sibling, David Miliband, who I thought could have been Tony Blair Mark II. Well, they chose the wrong brother, and the rest is history. Net zero-loving Ed Miliband continues to inflict damage on his own party, this time with an interview on BBC Breakfast TV today and the excellent Laura Koonsberg. He said that the government should pay money to countries impacted by global warming. That's right, we should pay money to other countries. Brackets, we're broke, but he seemed to have forgotten that. He said Britain has some historic responsibility to support poorer nations facing massive effects of climate change. Miliband is calling this loss and damage, a snake oil term, if you ask me. At no point did he deny what it really means, which is reparations for the Industrial Revolution. Take a look.
Would a Labour government pay reparations to developing countries for climate change?
I don't see it as about reparations, and actually when you talk to lots of campaigners, they don't either. This is about the issue of so-called loss and damage. This is the fact that poorer countries are facing massive effects of climate change. You know, we see it all around the world. We see it.
And we can quibble about the terminology.
Well, no, the terminology matters because lots of people are allergic to the term reparations.
That's exactly right. Millions of people are indeed allergic to the term reparations, a highly controversial and contested idea that opens up an almighty can of worms. Did Ed Miliband not get the memo that Britain is skint? Here is yet another example of the North London Labour mafia keen to punish Britain for its past and further hammer the national coffers with this needless and expensive act of self-destruction. If Miliband is concerned about big economies causing climate damage, why doesn't he go and campaign in Beijing? Perhaps wave a banner on Tiananmen Square and ask President Xi of China to compensate countries impacted by industrial developments. Good luck with that. Ed Miliband is famous for having trouble eating a bacon sandwich. Well, this latest act of political lunacy is even harder to swallow. Full disclosure, I like bacon sandwiches and I go for the brown sauce. What about you? Mark at gbnews.uk. Look, I'll get your reaction to that. Should Britain pay reparations for the Industrial Revolution? I think that Britain should be paid by every other country because we essentially built the modern world. They should be thanking us. But let's get the views of my brilliant panel tonight. So excited to have a very old friend of mine, TV presenter, celebrity chef and best-selling author Tonya Buxton, leading research analyst and writer Dr. Rakib Ehsan, and the brilliant political consultant and journalist Emma Burnell. Rakib, let's start with you. Reparations for the Industrial Revolution. Should we splash the cash and support poorer countries?
Well, I think that there's definitely ways that poorer countries can be supported in terms of their economic development. I think that the UK traditionally has actually been a leading force when it comes to trying to stimulate various forms of economic development, but especially female empowerment in various parts of the world. I think in terms of reparations for the Industrial Revolution, I think Labour really, they ought to stay away from those kind of arguments, if truth be told. We're in the middle of an ever-worsening cost-of-living crisis, which is disproportionately impacting on lower-income families with children and those living with disabilities. And I think these kind of discussions really, I think a great number of voters who Labour need to appeal to, they're not going to be fond of those kind of arguments at all, so they should stay away from it.
Emma Burnell, you were dangerously persuasive earlier in your arguments for a nurse's pay rise, but this is the hard sell for Labour, isn't it? I mean, I think this could be very politically damaging for them. The idea that Britain, currently facing an unprecedented economic crisis, should shell out to pay countries to say sorry for the Industrial Revolution.
Well, Mark, but before I get into that, I do have to pick you up on something. I mean, you've said some things tonight that I disagree with, but brown sauce, man, you've gone too far. You've gone far too far.
Would you go ketchup?
It's ketchup all the way, every day.
It just hasn't got... The brown sauce has got that bite. Do you know what I mean? That little bit of chilli.
Tang.
I mean, ketchup's the classic. What's wrong with it's the great British sauce? What's wrong with you, man?
Before we get to Labour losing the plot, Tonya, you are a celebrity chef. Brown sauce or ketchup on a bacon butty?
I'm sorry, it is brown sauce all the way. I'm sorry.
Oh, dear. Well, look, Emma, I'm sure you've got a few supporters out there. But, look, tomato sauce is red. You are red. You want a Labour government. I think a Labour government is now less possible with this nonsense.
I mean, for me, I would frame it completely differently. I think some of the stuff that you were just saying, Rakim, was actually much, much more interesting and important. And here's two things I would say. First of all, we need to think about how we do this as a partnership rather than a sort of patronising patriarchal relationship, because I don't think that helps anybody. Secondly, it has to be forward-looking. We shouldn't be looking at the past, but we should be looking at the future. So if we are, as we've been talking about, going to think about how we reshape our economy to have to be world leaders in the kind of future energy generation, technology that we'll be needing in 100 years' time, then maybe we can think about how we work with poorer nations to make sure that we can partner with them to make sure that they have access to these as much as we have, so that we can go forward. And that's a much, much better way of looking at a future relationship rather than simply trying to talk about what's happened in the past. So that's how I, as a political person, would frame this. It's not about, reparations. It's about developing a world that works for both lots of countries.
He's put his foot in it there. I mean, I think you'd be so much better in the shadow cabinet, Emma, because you wouldn't have been so wrong-headed to have even brought reparations into it. Does the Labour Party really need this man in their front line? Hasn't he done enough damage to the cause already?
Look, I'm very fond of Ed Miliband. I
Wasn't
have
a good
lot
interview,
of time
though, was
for,
it?
and he's really, really passionate about climate change in a way that I really rate, because I am very passionate about it. I do think it's one of the biggest challenges in the long term that we're going to face in this century, and I want someone at the heart of government who cares about it as much as Ed does. Yeah, he puts his foot in it sometimes, and yeah, he can't eat a bacon sandwich, but I think after what we've seen from certain other politicians in the last few years, I'll take that any day.
There you go. I've met him once and he is a very nice guy, I'll give you that. How about you, Tonya? What do you think about this? Should we cough up for our crimes of the past? We've had colonialism, now we've got to write a cheque for the Industrial Revolution, apparently.
Well, I'm of Greek origin. I think that you should all be paying Greece for democracy from now. I mean, how far back are we going to start paying our debts? I mean, it is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that he even mentioned it. And to quote another Greek, he lives in cloud cuckoo land. I mean, you've completely lost the British public. You know, everybody is really struggling and suffering at the moment. And the last thing they want to hear about is what money they can send out of the country and not into for their own homes. And when it comes to, I'm an environmentalist, and when it comes to climate change, you know, there is still a lot to discuss about what we can do for the planet. What never ceases to amaze me that these guys never talk about the pollution that's causing such damage and harm to this planet. Why are they not cleaning up plastics? Why are these guys still wearing masks? Why are they behaving in these single, you know, gloves and the use that they're doing that we went through during COVID? If you really care about the planet, let's do something that we can all do right now and ban plastics. That would be the first step, and that doesn't affect anybody. That won't affect people's bills or their homes. So if you really care about the planet, do that first.
My brilliant panel return at exactly 10:30 for tomorrow's papers, plus the quiz of the week, and I want you involved at home, whether you're listening on DAB+, or watching us on YouTube, on television, online. Lots more to get through. It's time now for this. Yes, it's time now for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, showbiz, sport, business and beyond. Tonight, Winston Peters, the leader of the New Zealand First political party since its foundation in 1993. Peter served as the 13th Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand from 96 to 98 and from 2017 to 2020. He also served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Treasurer of New Zealand in what has been a long and illustrious political career. In spite of New Zealand's strict COVID regulations, Winston Peters went against the grain and supported the convoyed 2022 New Zealand protest outside Parliament, calling for an end to vaccine mandates. In the summer of 2016, Peters also backed Brexit and told the New Zealand Parliament that he hoped Britain will show its independence from an ungrateful European parliamentary yoke and come back to the Commonwealth. I'm delighted to say that Winston Peters joins me now. Good evening, Mr. Peters.
Good evening.
A privilege to have you on the programme. First of all, can I ask you how things are in New Zealand? Is the country recovering from its sort of post-pandemic trauma?
No, it's not. We are facing, like many countries, a cost of living crisis. But the problem is a lot of it is home-born or brought about by a failure of governmental action. And that goes into energy as well. And then malaise, so to speak, with a year to go for the next election.
And how do you see that election playing out?
Well, that's very interesting. A bit like the preview I've heard to this program, it's sort of the case of, well, it's our turn now on one side, and some people are saying, well, they couldn't do worse than the last crowd. And neither of those options really are what New Zealand or any other country is looking for. Countries are looking for a much more superior, permanent, sustainable government that will last. And we've had too many transient ideas that simply don't work in our country of late.
Tell me about working with Jacinda Ardern. No doubt she does have her gifts, but you've clashed with her on more than one occasion.
Well, when you campaign, like the 2020 election, and all around the Western world, and we're a democracy where we know that there's a thing called a manifesto, as highfalutin as it might sound. It includes campaign promises because you're seeking consent from the people and a mandate to go forward on the basis of what you said. Jacinda Ardern and the Labour Party is doing so much now that was never part of the last campaign, never mandated, never part of their manifesto. And the consequence for that is that they're in steep trouble in terms of the polls. Now, the polls here are not as sound as they are in some countries, but the signs are all there that they're in deep, deep trouble. The question is, will the alternative do much better, which is what this country desperately needs?
What has been your appraisal of New Zealand's response to the pandemic, which, like Australia, was far stricter than in European countries like the UK?
Well, we started out in early 2020 having no idea what we were facing. But when we did, then we made some serious mistakes. Far too slow with the vaccine. The second thing that must concern people, despite the absolutist arguments, is that when people are given medicine, they're entitled to be told the potential downside. And that didn't happen. It was by way of an ultimatum. Take this or you can't go to work. Take this or you can't be employed, or you must do the following things. Now, that sort of tyrannical dictatorship is not justified either in modern medicine and certainly not in a modern democracy. And that's where Labour went wrong as well.
Yes, and of course you challenged those vaccine mandates and you supported those protesting. Did you pay a political price for your intervention?
Well, dare I say it, the equivalent of your industry, the media, the mainstream media in New Zealand, all attacked me. And I was also trespassed off Parliament by the Speaker. And so to cut a long story short, we nevertheless ignored that. Took the Speaker to the High Court and won a major case here because he was adjudged by the court to have acted unreasonably and irrationally. And then he had also prescribed my fundamental rights as a person or any New Zealander in my country. So it was a major case. And in the end, that's what matters, the fact that there's a standard or precedent that he couldn't bypass, because I went to speak to those protesters because not one parliamentarian from any party in Parliament was prepared to hear them out. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong, but peaceful protest is a critical part of the democracy we are and the one that we inherited from your country as well.
Now, I don't know if this is an unfair characterisation, but many see Jacinda Ardern as irredeemably woke and a tyrant. I've looked at her actions in the course of the pandemic and I've dubbed her the Kiwi Mussolini. Here's a video of her, Winston, essentially explaining that the government is the only place where you can get the facts. Take a listen to this.
For that information, do feel free to visit at any time to clarify any rumour you may hear, covid19.govt.nz. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth. We will provide information frequently.
The government is your source of truth. Anything else you should ignore. That sounds like straight out of George Orwell's 1984, Winston.
Well, sadly, it is. But here's the real issue. The media in this country should have seen that for what it was. It is tyrannical talk. It might be masked in a pleasant face and nice dress and a haircut. Wouldn't matter if it was a male or female, but that is tyrannical talk. It's the very seeds of, how shall I say it, tyranny. And people, though, today are seeing things with great clarity. And that's why the so-called gloss has very truly come off now.
Do you think that she'll be out at the next election?
I don't think it. I know it.
Can I ask you about where New Zealand is now? You mentioned the cost of living crisis. Go for it.
The only reason why she became the Prime Minister was because in our negotiations, and we sought a certain economic and social plan, and it was signed up, we agreed to it, and they simply couldn't keep that agreement. It became very, very clear at the end that having shaken one's hand, they weren't keeping their word. And in the end, the ramifications for that will be huge coming into the 2023 election.
Winston, an interesting point. Why did you back Brexit all those years ago?
Well, to tell you the truth, It's because there are about 2.3 billion people out there in a thing called the Commonwealth. We have never done much with the Commonwealth in recent times at all, and it's sad because at the time I was in the UK in 2016, the Commonwealth was growing at about 5.5% across the whole Commonwealth. Our trade relations were sparse and scarce in the extreme, and I could see a chance if there was the right leadership and the right sense of immediacy to make a change. And then I saw out of the EU something quite sad, because I am one of those people that saw the great stability of Europe post the war as having a lot to do with NATO, having a lot to do with the EU. But when you've got a bureaucracy utterly out of control with contempt for domestic parliaments, then there was an enduring future coming, and it didn't mean that it would last. That's why, unlike most others from around the world who backed Remain, I thought that Britain was going to go, and I believed it would go. And the reason why it would go was, for the first time, the ordinary person, usually a Labour voter, was going to get a voice, and they weren't going to waste it.
A deep privilege to have you on the programme. I wish you well all the way live from New Zealand. The former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, Winston Peters. A fascinating conversation. Your reaction, mark@gbnews.uk. Lots more to come. At exactly 10:30, we have the papers live and uninterrupted with my panel, plus our quiz of the week. I'll be testing you at home and my panel in the studio for their knowledge of the week's big stories. Plus, we've got your emails as well. I'll catch up on those very shortly. Lots to get through, but the papers are next. See you in 3.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the...
Yeah, listen to GB News Radio. It's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is. Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales
And Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel. Britain's
news channel.
Well, look, so many emails coming in thick and fast. Mark at gbnews.uk. Fascinating interview with Winston Peters there, the former Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that Ardern is on borrowed time. Jacinda Ardern will be out at the next election. I won't miss her, will you? Let's have a look at a couple of emails, if I can. Yeah, let's have a look. We shall go to Winston. Steve says, Mark, what a pleasure to listen to such an eloquent speaker in Winston Peters. Such a pity our own politicians are not in the same class as him. There you go. Brilliant point. Well, it's exactly 10:30. So at this time, every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we bring you the papers live and uninterrupted. So let's have that thing they call a sting in telly. It's very fancy. We've got to play a band and graphics and all that stuff. There you go. Now, look, let's have a look at tomorrow's front pages. And what have we got? Well, we will start with the Daily Telegraph. And they're leading with this. Britain opens door to climate reparations. Number 10 could be forced to pay out to poorer countries hit by global warming disasters. Don't tell me that Rishi's signing up for this madness as well. Also, nurses' strike will force NHS to run bank holiday service. As I pointed out in my Big Opinion monologue, and I said it with no pleasure, that if nurses go on strike, people will die. The Times next. Billions more spent in UK will count as foreign aid. Billions of pounds of government spending in Britain is being classified as foreign aid as ministers grapple with the small boats crisis and the war in Ukraine. Under Treasury rules, as much as £3.5 billion for refugees and migrants in the UK will be considered part of Britain's contribution to international development. It means the government is in line to spend almost half of the foreign aid budget in Britain. Effectively, about 0.3% of gross national income will go on projects overseas. The government's target is 0.5%, of course, brought down from 0.7% before the pandemic. Williamson's tacit threat to PM over private life. A minister has claimed that Sir Gavin Williamson raised details about her private life during a conversation in an attempt to silence her whilst she was on the back benches. The Tory MP, who told the Conservative Party at the weekend that she was willing to discuss the matter, said that Williamson had called her into his office when he was Chief Whip in 2016. At the time, she was campaigning on an issue that was causing the government difficulty. During the meeting, Williamson is said to have raised a sensitive issue about her private life, which she interpreted as a tacit threat. Allies of Williamson denied that he'd been trying to silence the PM and that he'd simply raised the issue in a pastoral capacity. Believe that, if you will. With friends like that, who needs enemies? The Sun next. And exclusive, jungle shock. Rishi raps celeb Hancock. Rishi Sunak hit out at Matt Hancock last night for swanning off to join I'm a Celebrity. The PM said he risked losing voters' trust by leaving them for the show, which started in Australia just this evening. Mr Sunak said, I was very disappointed. MPs should be working hard for their constituents, he added. Well, I couldn't agree with the Prime Minister more. What a prize numpty he has turned out to be. I've got to say, I feel sorry for all those reptiles that have got to spend 3 weeks living with Matt Hancock. The Guardian now. Martin Kemp. We go Independent now. Forgive us. Let's go straight to the Indie. And how about this? And it's at COP26, I told leaders to open their hearts. Now they must open their eyes. Devastation caused by climate inaction is only getting worse, according to eco-activist Elizabeth Watuti. World still on course for 1.5 degree centigrade target, insists Sunak. Rishi Sunak was last night accused of lacking leadership as he arrived at the COP27 summit to a warning that the climate crisis was close to irreversible. As he left for Egypt, Mr Sunak argued it was still possible to limit global temperature rises to 1.5. But the UK was criticised for failing to beef up promises to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Labour criticised a vacuum of leadership during the UK's year-long COP presidency, whilst Greenpeace said the government failed to match up to its climate targets. How about this one? Bonfire night of mayhem. The boy has died amid running battles between police and teenagers as towns and cities across Britain became a bonfire night war zone. The 17-year-old crashed through a greenhouse as he fled police chasing as many as 80 youths firing rockets in Halifax in West Yorkshire. Total scenes of chaos there and a devastating tragic death. Daily Express next. Keeping triple lock is matter of Tory principle. Senior Tories urged Rishi Sunak to stick to the triple lock pensions pledge. As a matter of principle, 3 ex-ministers demanded that pensioners are put top of the list of priorities for next week's autumn statement, fearing that the party risks losing its vital grey votes. Tory grandee Sir John Hayes yesterday said the formula for deciding state pension rises was a Conservative idea and urged its retention. Let's go to The Guardian now. And revealed UK and US failing to pay fair share of $100 billion climate fund. PM vows to press Egypt over jailed writer's fate. And Hunt plans £60 billion worth of cuts and tax rises, as we discussed earlier in the show. The Eye newspaper now, biggest ever nurses' strike would hit A&E patients. Around 300,000 nurses are thought to have voted in favour of industrial action. Strike is expected to worsen the COVID backlog, with so-called non-urgent operations postponed and waiting times extended for patients to be admitted from A&E departments. And last but not least for now, the Daily Star. Jungle kicks off. Coco's pants on fire. Who dares whines about their SAS TV deal to line pockets on I'm a Celebrity? Cheeky faker Coco Hancock got his celebrity SAS contract changed so he could trouser around 400k and go into the jungle. This, according to insiders. Nice work if you can get it. And those are your front pages. Let's get reaction to tomorrow's papers now from TV presenter, celebrity chef and best-selling author Tonya Buxton, a leading research analyst and writer Dr. Rakib Ehsan, and political consultant and journalist Emma Burnell. Lots of stories to get through, some of which we've already covered. That's how ahead of the game we are, Tonya Buxton, news-wise. But can we talk about foreign aid? So the front page of the Times, billions more spent in the UK will count as foreign aid. I think this will satisfy many voters, the idea that this cash that leaves the country will actually stay in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it does actually make sense to me, because actually it is for migrants and people coming into the country that this money is going to be spent, and so it makes sense to me.
And then it makes the hotel bills, the £7 million a day, more palatable.
Well, I don't think that's ever going to be palatable to any of us, you know, having that type of money being spent on hotels and then complaints about the food. And when you're dealing with people that are literally at food banks trying to deal with their families, I know working people who are queuing up on food banks and then they're hearing about migrants complaining about
homeless
their
veterans
meals
on the streets.
Thank you. I mean, it's just, so that's never going to satisfy us. But this makes sense to me.
Yeah, and this question about the percentage that we actually share in terms of our gross national products at the moment is 0.5%. It came down from 0.7. Should it stay at 0.5?
Yes.
For how long?
Till we get on our feet again, till we're not dealing with food banks, till we haven't got veterans on the street. That's till how long?
Emma, what do you think about this? To a degree, they're cooking the books, aren't they?
Oh, they're completely cooking the books. And it's also incredibly short-termist. One of the reasons that we do foreign aid is not actually because we're these crazy altruists who just want to give away a bunch of money. It's because actually helping in foreign countries can actually reduce some of the pressures of people coming to here in migration, of the difficulties that other people are having. The completely cynical view is it opens up markets for our products. There are so many reasons why we invest. For me, and I've said this before, I wouldn't put a percentage on it. I don't think it should be a percentage of our GDP, because our GDP goes up and down. It makes it incredibly hard to plan long term. What we should be doing is putting long-term investment into schemes that work and monitoring them properly and making sure that we are really, really thinking through how we can make a real difference with the money that we have and the ability that we have to intervene in places where we have relationships.
A fixed cost would be tricky, though, if we had a recession or, God forbid, another pandemic. Isn't the idea of the percentage that it shrinks when we're in trouble and it grows when we're doing well?
I suspect it shrinks when we're in trouble and never grows again. This is, again, we've all said investment is important. That's not something that stops at the edge of our shores. We need international relationships. We need to make sure that investment is happening in order to deal with things like people being forced out of their countries through migration. We want to stop the migration crisis. One element of that, it's not the whole element, it's a whole load of other things to be done. But one element of that is making sure that we're making things easier for people in the country so they don't want to leave them.
However, Rakib, what about many of my viewers who are furious at the idea that whilst the country is in such an economic crisis, we're shipping cash abroad?
Well, I think that's a reasonable view. I think that this story, though, just shows that it's a government, it's desperation, for me, to be honest. They've mismanaged its own national borders, and now it's looking to cook the books with international development funding. One point
This will be popular with voters, though, won't it?
It could be. It could be. I mean, the voters will also know that one of the reasons why they're doing this is because they can't. We've got a dysfunctional immigration system.
Exactly. They're misspending the money on the systems. How you count it or don't count it. The systems aren't working. They're still spending a fortune on it.
It's not our fault, though, is it, that 1,000 people are crossing the Channel every day, some of whom do not have a claim for asylum?
Some of them don't. Some of them do. But
none of the Albanians do, and it was 40% Albanians.
Listen, Mark, then we need to have a debate, for example, about our own legislation, including modern slavery.
Anyone claiming that the current system works is insane. So therefore, we're going to count a bunch of money that we know we're badly spending towards things that we could be spending much better elsewhere.
But couldn't we use that money, the foreign aid money, to fix the asylum problem?
We're not going to.
And They're just
going to count. This has just been counted.
Don't you think it's hire more people to process the applications?
That would make sense, and also I think there should be visas for people that want to. There's people that are coming over for a better life. Fair enough. My parents came over for a better life. Then we need to have some kind of visa action that happens that allows them to come into the country and work and for their better life.
Absolutely.
But on the same grounds, then, as you said, we were talking about. The majority of Albanians, unfortunately, that are coming over are criminals. I mean, I know two lots of Albanians. I know some fantastic builders that are amazing.
Do you know it's a majority of those? I mean, do we know anything about the Albanians?
I think one thing that
we do, because I know people. I know two cases personally of people that rented their flats out and ended up being places that were making marijuana. And now, if you try and rent your flat out now, normal, good, hard-working Albanians are less likely to be able to rent somewhere because there's this kind of ethos that they go and they do things.
We need to break the criminal gangs.
That's it. We need to break the criminal gangs.
But this is the problem. I don't believe that they're going to manage that. I don't believe they're going to do it. What they're going to do is put all this money into what they're currently doing, which isn't working, and just ramp up the rhetoric rather than actually say, look, we have messed this up. We need to change it. We need to completely reorganise it and do it better. But doing it better doesn't win them those plaudits for saying terrible things on the telly. And they're more interested in putting on a front than actually sorting it out.
You could argue that the Rwanda plan was just window dressing, Rakib.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, it's not going according to plan, is it? And if the argument is that we have to leave the European Court on Human Rights to facilitate the Rwanda partnership, well, it doesn't seem like the Conservatives are very keen on that either. So I think the problem is there's a lack of coherence when it comes to its policies on immigration.
Let's if we can, Rakib, go to the nurses now. We spoke about them earlier in the show. It was in response to my big opinion monologue in which I just said that we've smashed the economy against a brick wall for 2.5 years. No one's getting a pay rise. However, Can we step aside from the economics of this and look at the ethics of it? The I newspaper, biggest ever nurses' strike, would hit A&E patients. What about that sworn commitment that doctors and nurses make when they join the service, which is to tend to the sick? If they down tools, people will die.
Well, I think the issue here is it could be very counterproductive, because I think at the moment most people would actually argue that nurses do deserve a pay rise. Now...
But what about the act of striking? Is it immoral?
Well, I think that it depending on certain industries and certain sectors, the impact of striking can be more severe for society compared to other sectors.
But can I just say, isn't this just an extension of what they did to us a lot of the time during the lockdown period?
They went on strike.
So, I mean, in many ways, well, I know my mother-in-law is dead because her GP just went on strike, wouldn't see her, would speak to her on the phone. She kept saying, I'm unwell, I need you to see you.
Cancer appointments were cancelled?
Well, she died of cancer. She was too late. It was too late. By the time they actually saw her, we went to A&E and actually ended up having to go privately. She's now dead. So I feel like a lot of GPs and a lot of surgeries and a lot of doctors kind of went on strike during lockdown anyway.
Well, I think one thing that backs that up is the pingdemic. So medics were staying at home, self-isolating because they'd been in contact with someone that had COVID. Well, go figure, you work in a hospital. They didn't have symptoms. And I called it out early in the pandemic. And then it was revealed later that lots of doctors were ignoring the ping because they said, well, OK, I was near someone that had COVID, I feel fine, and I better go in because I could save some lives. But look, let's not, as you mentioned earlier very wisely, Emma, let's not get sucked into the pandemic debate. We've been there and got the T-shirt. What about the ethics of a nurse going on strike?
I mean, ultimately, we have to have the right to withdraw our labour, whether you're a nurse or a trained
fireman,
driver.
a police officer, the military?
It is essential. What are you going to do? Force people into work? This is the first nursing strike in this country in 106 years. If you've pushed people who desperately don't want to strike to that point, then we have to ask ourselves where the failures have happened. And I don't think it's the failures of the nurses. OK, fascinating debate. Well, lots more to come. And next up, we've got our quiz of the week. I'll be testing you at home and my panel in the studio on their knowledge of the week's big stories, and we'll discuss some of those stories as well. Looking forward to that. And I do want you involved, so send in your answers to the quiz, mark@gbnews.uk. Whoever gets the most right answers gets a shout out at the end of the show. And I know you're a clever lot. I'll see you in 3.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
It's time now for the quiz of the week, where we test you on how well you've been following the news throughout the week. We'll be getting your wonderful your viewers. We'll be getting you, wonderful viewers. That's my fault, no one else's. We'll be getting you to play along. So I want you to email your answers in, mark@gbnews.uk, and we will give a shout out to whoever got the most right answers. Before that, one final email of the show, and I love this, from Simon, who said, Mark, it's a shame that you right-wingers don't see government tax as a communal aspiration, where a community spirit means we help each other. Doesn't matter what the tax rate is, the rich will always look to pay less. My eyes are letting me down. Housing issues was caused by Thatcher. Simon, thank you for that. Look, I'm not a right-winger, I'm not a left-winger, I'm not pro-Tory, pro-Labour, I'm pro-freedom. But Simon, thank you for that. Do email again, mark@gbnews.uk. OK, it's time now for our quiz of the week, and let's start with our very first question. How many staff members did Elon Musk sack as part of his Twitter takeover? Was it 3,000, 3,700 or 4,000?
3,700.
It was 3,700 is the right answer. Number two, what did thousands of protesters take to the streets of London to demand yesterday?
Enough is enough. A general election.
General election is the right answer, calling for a national poll and help with the cost of living crisis. Are we going to get an early general election, Emma?
No. Why would you do that if you were Rishi Sunak?
What's your best guess? Because I'm thinking May 2024.
Yeah, May, June 2024. They're not going to do a winter election, which they could do. They could push it to December 2024 because you get 5 years. But I reckon that nobody wants another winter election, so it'll be May, June 2024.
If he basically uses up the clock, Ricky, it looks desperate, doesn't it?
Well, I think his plan will be to try and take it deep into 2024, to be honest, try and argue that stable. It'll be about stabilising the economy. That's the only route that he has left, really. That
you don't send your activists on the doorstep in December if you can possibly help it.
No, and no one wants a January election.
No.
Worst time of the year. We've got the Christmas hangover, haven't we?
And then it's the darkest time, isn't it?
We've got the dead tree in the front garden.
Exactly.
You've got the credit card bills.
Miserable.
Thanks, but no thanks. Who called the Conservative Party totally incompetent and morally bankrupt today?
Who hasn't?
Some of their own, even. But it is a leader of the opposition. But who? Which one?
Ed Davey.
Ed Davey, that's right, leader of the Lib Dems. What was Matt Hancock's punishment from Parliament for his involvement in this year's I'm a Celebrity?
Got the whip taken off, isn't it?
He got the whip taken off, exactly right. The Football World Cup starts a fortnight today. Who will host nation Qatar play in the tournament opening match?
Ecuador.
Ecuador, blimey, look at you, Mr. Mastermind.
Football, isn't it?
Exactly.
A stampede during Halloween festivities tragically left more than 150 people
Seoul.
dead. In Seoul,
That's very
Seoul
sad.
in South Korea. One of the worst stories in recent memory for that poor country. Number 7, why was the TV show host James Corden in the headlines this week?
Oh, he was rude in a restaurant and then he got banned from the restaurant and then he got unbanned from the restaurant.
Well, no! There's a new story.
He got banned
He
again.
was banned again. Because he came out and said, no, go on then.
It's to do with his material, recycling material. Do you know about this?
No.
Has he been copying people?
He nicked a joke off Ricky Gervais.
Oh, God.
There you go. He's now paid the price.
That doesn't surprise me. It's not that funny anyway.
What did US singer Rihanna face a backlash for this week?
Oh, because she got the pirate guy, what's his name?
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp, who's walking her fashion show.
There you go.
I knew one.
Share the
I
points.
knew one.
Share the points. How about this? Who became the UK's first undisputed female boxing champion this week?
Nicola Adams is the only female boxer I know, and I love
It's
her. But I don't know.
Chantel Cameron. And US singer Aaron Carter tragically died this week. Very, very sad news. Which famous band is his brother Nick Carter part of?
Backstreet Boys.
Boom. Look at you, down with the kids.
Who are playing
You
tonight.
are so hip.
All right.
Yeah,
We
I mean,
could
you
be
like
there.
tomato
We could be
ketchup
there.
on your bacon butties, but other than that, you've got a very wise judgment. Brilliant stuff. Well, Greg, have you got a winner at home? They're scouring the emails now. Can I just say, it's been a really brilliant 3 days. I've loved having your company. Steve in Sheffield got the most right answers. Well done, Big Steve.
Oh, Big Steve.
What a brain box. The Steel City. Come on! Can I say that I've loved having your company? And yesterday was a really big show because we did 3 hours. Every Saturday now, it's 8 till 11, not 9. So we start an hour earlier, and we start with the People's Hour, your video calls. If you want to be part of it, then drop me an email, mark@gbnews.uk. Well done to Greg and the team. They worked so hard this weekend and got the show across the line, but we couldn't do any of it without you. I will see you on Friday at 9.
Let's look ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK will be dry towards the east but cloudy for most, with rain pushing in from the southwest. Here are the details. Starting off across northern Scotland, and here it may be a little bit chilly at first due to clear skies overnight. Further south and west it will be cloudy and very wet. It will also be cloudy and wet across much of Northern Ireland. Here the rain could be heavy at times and it will be windy too. There will be some very heavy rain across Cumbria, which could lead to some flooding and difficult driving conditions, cloudy and damp elsewhere in the northwest. Parts of Wales will also have a very wet morning as a band of rain pushes eastwards. Western parts are likely to have the heaviest rain and the strongest winds as well. Meanwhile, across the West Midlands, it will be cloudy with some rain, but further east across the East Midlands, there will be clear spells and some mist and fog is possible. Also clear skies and a little bit of mist and fog perhaps across East Anglia. Here it'll be blustery and not as windy as further west, turning cloudy and wet later. Across the southern counties, there are set to be quite a few showers around. Some of these could be quite heavy, and it'll be windy across the coasts as well. The cloudy, wet and windy weather will spread to most parts through the morning, and the rain will turn heavy for some. That's how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says texts sent by Sir Gavin Williamson to a female colleague were not acceptable or right. Speaking to the Sun newspaper, Rishi Sunak says he'd been aware of the messages sent to former Chief Whip Wendy Morton, but didn't know the details before last night. In those messages, Sir Gavin accused her of trying to punish MPs by excluding them from the Queen's funeral. Mr Sunak is under fire for bringing Sir Gavin back into the Cabinet despite being told he was under investigation. Well, Rishi Sunak has arrived in Egypt for the COP27 Climate Change Summit, where he'll call for a global mission for clean growth. Now, warning for those watching on television, this next footage contains flashing images. The Prime Minister, who U-turned after originally saying he wouldn't attend, will pledge to make the UK a clean energy superpower. He'll also urge all countries to move away from fossil fuels when he addresses the conference tomorrow. Mr Sunak will also argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlights the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. Well, meanwhile, Boris Johnson will call for an end to defeatism at COP27 amid a worsening economic situation. In his speech at the summit, the former Prime Minister will warn that a corrosive cynicism about net zero is ruining efforts to wean the world off of fossil fuels. Mr Johnson will insist it's still possible to achieve the goal of making sure temperatures don't go above 1.5 degrees, avoiding the worst effects of climate change. It be shut down. Action against detention and deportation campaigners are also calling for Home Secretary Suella Braverman to resign. The site has been at the centre of a crisis this week after it emerged that it was over capacity, with some asylum seekers describing conditions as being like a prison. Downing Street says the numbers have now fallen to 2,600. And the government says it has contingency plans in place if nurses go on strike amid a growing threat of industrial action in the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing is expected to announce this week that its members have, for the first time, voted in favour of national strike action in their dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members have been balloted, the biggest ever in the union's history. We're on TV, online and on DAB Plus radio. This is the People's Channel, GB News. Time now for headliners.
I'm Mark Dolan and this is Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's front pages. Tonight, in the company of two brilliant comedians, Josh Howie and making her Headliners debut, the excellent Catherine Henson. Let's start with tomorrow's front pages and we begin with the Daily Mail. As Sunak flies in for COP27, Miliband calls for taxpayers' cash to be funneled abroad. We'll be discussing that story shortly. Red Ed, UK must pay climate change damages. Next up, the Daily Telegraph. Britain opens door to climate reparations. Number 10 could be forced to pay out to poorer countries hit by global warming disasters. Also, nurses' strike will force NHS to run a bank holiday service. I think we've had that for about 2.5 years, frankly. Next up, the